Welcome, everyone. We are counting down the start to our virtual field trip. While we're waiting, please use the Q&A to tell us your class name and where you are in the state of Minnesota, or if you're outside Minnesota. We'd love to give you a shout out. So Miss Runes, fifth graders from Lanesboro, welcome. We'll get started right at 10 o'clock. All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to kick off our virtual field trip in October. This is actually our second one, but we are excited to go to an apple orchard today, and we are excited for all of you joining us. So Mrs. R's second graders from Humboldt, Iowa, Miss Molly's fourth graders from Winona, Minnesota, Winnie Mac fourth graders, we're excited to have you here. We have, there we go, our timer just went off. We have Mrs. Colasar's class at Bluff Creek Elementary. Hello to you. And I apologize, teachers, if I say your name a little incorrectly. Some of these names are a little tricky, but Mrs. Hodick's first graders from Jordan, Minnesota, Mrs. O'Brien's pre-K from Cross Lake, Miss Odlin's Taft Elementary from Humboldt, Iowa. Also, we're excited for you to be here with us. We have a homeschool family that's from Campbell, Minnesota, but they are in Virginia. So joining us all the way from the East Coast. Ms. Tillers from Taft Elementary, Mrs. Kreckelbird's class from Chanhassen. We're excited for all of you to be here, along with Mrs. Schrupp from Maple Lake, Ms. Jensen from Jordan, as well as many others. So good morning, everyone. My name is Sue Knott. I'm an education specialist with the Minnesota Agriculture in the Classroom program, and we are excited to host this virtual field trip to Fireside Apple Orchard and Gardens near Northfield, Minnesota. My colleague Carrie Seidel is doing the tech for today, and Jessica Blotsberg is on site as our camera person. Now, we are using both Wi-Fi and data through our technology, so we have to flip back a couple times and we practice this, and hopefully it'll go smoothly, but if it doesn't, just bear with us. So once again, welcome to everyone who's joining us. We are excited to have you, and we hope that you have lots of questions to ask our apple orchard and apple grower, our apple orchard owner and apple grower Darren today. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to put those questions right in there, and we'll try to ask as many as possible. If you're joining us through YouTube, you can use the comment feature, and we'll also try to ask questions from there. So it's 10:02. It is time to get started. So we're going to virtually travel to Northfield, Minnesota, and I'd like to introduce you to Darren Winfield. Darren's the owner of Fireside Orchard and Gardens in Northfield. And Darren, start off by telling us all about your orchard.
Hello and good morning. My name is Darren Winfield, and I work here at Fireside Orchard and Gardens in Northfield, Minnesota. Our orchard is about 42 acres. This last spring, we bought another 12 acres, so 57 acres total. We've got about 30 acres of apple trees. So in those 30 acres, we've got 26, 27 varieties of different apples. They all have a Minnesota angle to them, whether it be something like Honeycrisp, which was developed by the University of Minnesota, or the B51 apple, which was developed by the Scheffelbein program out in Worthington. So we've got quite a few different types of apples, and we've got quite a few different apple trees out here. So in the 30 acres of apples we have out here, we've got about 10 to 11,000 trees. So it's a lot of work to keep all the trees in good condition, to keep all the apples getting picked at the right time and shipping them all out and having them all ready for you in the fall. If I could, I'd go through just a little bit of the process and how all these apple trees work. So every winter, every tree is pruned by hand. This is called a lopper. Basically, it's a clipper. So we go through every tree in the winter and we pick off any branches we don't really like. We want to keep all of our trees kind of the same similar shape. So any branch that goes straight up in the air, like this branch, will come in here in the winter and we'll cut that one off. Any branches that go straight down, like this branch, we'll come in here and clip that apple, that branch off of there. Any branches that go back into the tree that will take sunlight away from these apples down here. The apple needs sunlight to get to it, to help it with its process throughout the summer to ripen and to have the best flavor. So that's about 10,000 to 11,000 trees that every winter has a person go around and touch it and mold it and shape it to the way that we want it to look. If I could have Jessica point down the rows to our south, you can see some Haralson apples on the south and how there's a pretty straight row of apple trees, and they're not very tall. They're only about 10 feet tall at the max. We want to keep our apple trees on the shorter side so that when we have people picking those apples, they're not on a ladder much more than 7 or 8 feet up in the air, because we don't want to have people potentially get hurt from falling on a ladder. Plus, it's just a lot easier that way. So these trees that you're looking at are about 7 to 10 years old. These trees here are about 10 years old. They're just coming into their prime production life. So they'll make about 2 to 3 bushels of apples per tree. So if we do the math, we've got about 20 to 30,000 bushels of apples, and a bushel of apples is about 40 pounds. So that's a lot of apples that we go through. Today we're making cider in our production building, so that's one of the uses for our apples. Our favorite use of the apples is to eat them fresh. Another use of our apples is we make a whole bunch of apple pies and apple crisps. So that's our winter program for the apples. In the spring, if I could have Jessica come and look down here on the ground, all of these trees are thinned out by hand. So we have a person who actually comes in and takes an apple and just knocks it off the tree and drops it down onto the ground. The apple stays there all year long. Once an apple hits the ground, it's never picked up again. It basically will melt down and add nutrients and back into the soil for the apple to use in the future years as it grows. So there's quite a bit of thinning that goes on. And then the last big stage that we have for the year is our apple picking. We have people that are picking apples right now. We'll pick all the way up until the first freeze, which will probably be here at the end of October. So the last main stage of our apple season is to pick the apples. So this is a picking bag. It goes on over your shoulder. You'll hold the bag here. There's a string that holds a bottom loop, but basically you'll go up to the tree, pick the apples off, set them in the bag. And when this bag is full, you'll pull this little string out here, and these apples will all fall out into the bin. So this is what we call a bin apples. These are sweet tangos. These are my favorite apple by a long shot. These apples were picked here at the end of August and have been sitting in our big cold room, which we'll show you later. But these apples are getting packed as we speak. They're going into bags, into boxes, and being shipped out to stores across the Twin Cities area in southern Minnesota, and are available for sale now. So
okay,
this bin of yes,
Darren, we have a couple. I'm going to interrupt you and ask a couple questions. So the first one
Sure.
is from Rayleigh, and she wants to know: do you sell your apples at stores, or can people only buy them at your orchard?
We sell at quite a few stores. We've got some wholesale customers that we work with. The largest part of our apples probably going through the Twin Cities. So Kowalski's stores are our biggest wholesaler. They've got 12 different locations in the cities. We work with Fairway, with Marshalls, with some of the Cub stores. We worked with quite a few different people to sell apples in the stores. The biggest thing you can probably look for is the Fireside Orchard and Gardens logo. You'll notice our logo with the red apple and rose in the middle of it. That represents our orchard with the apple, and the gardens. The gardens is a rose garden. We also have koi fish and stuff too, but you'll notice our apples with that red apple rose logo on them.
Awesome. Okay, a few other questions. So Abby from Mrs. O's class in Rochester wants to know, what is your most popular variety of apple?
Our most popular for what we sell, the Honeycrisp by a mile. We've got 8 acres of the orchard. So 8 out of 30 acres are dedicated to the Honeycrisp apple. So we do about 160 bins of Honeycrisp apples. Take that times 40 pounds, that'll give you the number of pounds of Honeycrisp that we sell. But that by far and away is our most popular apple. That apple was developed by the University of Minnesota, and kind of a cool fact, that apple and me are about the same age. The apple was found at the University of Minnesota breeding program about 1977, the same year that I came about.
Oh, well, I was born in 78, so I'm just like a year younger. Okay, we have
There you go.
a couple classes, Mrs. Field and Mrs. Colazars. They want to know after you pick the apples, how long do they last?
It depends on the apple. So the Sweet Tango stores pretty well. The Honeycrisp stores pretty well. The apples behind us are a keepsake. They are probably our last picked apple. They, now despite their name, they don't keep that great. They keep for a couple weeks. One of our most popular apples is called B51. If you're outside of the state of Minnesota, you'll know it as a sugar bee apple, but in the state of Minnesota, we call it a B51. That apple lasts the longest. We eat that apple into March and April of next year. The problem is they're super crunchy and sweet and delicious, and they don't really last that long. So we don't really need to store them that long because they're normally gone by then.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, we have a couple classes that want to know, it sounds like about pests. So the Winnie Mac fourth graders are curious about deer or other animals invading your orchard. And
Sure.
Liam is wondering, no, not Liam, Mrs. Lopez class wants to know if there's caterpillars that eat your apples.
Not as much caterpillars, but the bugs are our number one problem. So if we could go, we'll just take a step over here and I'll have Jessica point to the west side. You can see there's a fence. It's 7 feet tall and there are 7 strands of wire, and it's an electric fence, something similar to what you see with cows or other livestock. But that 7-foot tall fence is just a basic deterrent for the deer. Deer can jump over that fence. That's really not much of an obstacle for them. They can run and they'll stick their heads through it and run out. But the biggest deterrent that we have for the deer is a Polaris Ranger that I hop on and go tearing around the orchard, and we shoo them out anytime we see them. Deer are a big problem because deer like to eat the freshest, the juiciest, greenest parts of the tree, which is the very end of the branch. When you cut off the end of the branch, you stop that branch from growing more. That stops the tree from having more space to grow apples. As far as the insects go, caterpillars aren't really the problem. Our biggest problem are flying insects, like the little buggy things. The Japanese beetles, the little black shiny beetles that you saw about a month ago, they'll eat a whole bunch of the leaves off the top, and if they can, they'll get into the apples. They like apples just as much as we do, so they think they're quite a treat. But we do have some sprays to keep those bugs at bay. We try to use a very minimal spray schedule. We try to spray at night. So normally when I do all of the spraying, I pick all of the insecticides that we use, and I don't start spraying until about 9 o'clock at night. That way all the bees, all the lacewings, hopefully all the beneficial bugs are at home sleeping. The sprays that we pick, we use a spray that's considered systemic. So it gets onto the tree, it gets absorbed into the leaves, and only pests that eat the leaves will die. So like the bees, the good bugs, they don't feed on the leaves. They pollinate the flowers for us. So we try to use a very minimal spray schedule if we can.
Awesome. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes out here in the orchard. So Darren, how about we work our way to the
Perfect.
production house? And as we're walking, I have a few questions that I can ask you. First of
Wonderful.
all, Kinsley from Mrs. Martinez's class and also Liam both have a question about the number of people who pick apples on your farm. So how many apple pickers do you have?
Right now we've got, so there's a crew of 6 people picking apples, plus we've got 3 people in the production building. So we'll have anywhere from 6 to 9 people picking apples on a given day.
And is that like how many total employees does your orchard have?
So in the fall, we've got about 35 people working for us right now. In the winter, when we're doing pruning and some of the more basic work, there's 2 other gentlemen that work and then me. So there's 3 people. So our employees, the number of our employees changes quite a bit from our off season to our main season. And this is our main season right now.
Sure, that definitely makes sense. It looks like it's a beautiful day, perfect weather for an apple orchard today. Bree from Rochester wants to know, how long do the apple trees live?
So our oldest apple trees out here are almost 30 years old, maybe even a little bit older than that. Realistically, the life of an apple tree kind of is, up to 30 years, maybe not much past that. So once a tree gets older than that, you get a lot of bigger branches. Bigger branches don't really create fruit buds. Fruit buds are what makes fruit or the apple. So realistically, when you plant an apple tree, it takes 5 years before you're going to start taking apples off of that tree. And if the apple tree really has a useful life up until 30 years, so you've got about 25 years to harvest apples off that tree.
Okay, good to know. Darren, we're looking at a video that I think was done from a drone, which is kind of an overview of your orchard and gardens. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the gardens and the pond?
Sure, sure. So the gardens area is a rose garden. We've got a whole bunch of different kinds of roses. Our summer and spring, we spend a lot of hours pruning and taking off the rose flowers and making sure that the new bloom comes in. We've also got a koi pond on site with hundreds, maybe 1,000 different koi fish in there. So that's just kind of daily maintenance for the koi fish. But yeah, a lot of people like to come and see the different colors of our koi fish.
Okay, we have one quick question, and then you can tell us about this production building. Marley is wondering, why do you also have roses with your apples? All right, we might have lost Darren for a second. This is where we needed to switch our Wi-Fi and internet connection. So hopefully we'll have him back in just a minute. But I did want to let you guys know, teachers, and oh, Darren, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, sorry, we lost you just for a second, but I had a
No
question
problem.
from Marley, who was curious, why do you have rose gardens along with your apple orchard?
Well, the gardens go with the apple orchard because our orchard really is about the green space, about being outside, about enjoying nature and having nice things to look at. So the roses are, kind of a pretty area for people to come and to be in the green space, have a calm area to sit and enjoy and relax being in the outside.
Awesome. Okay, it looks like we're inside. Can you tell us about this building that you're walking through right now?
Sure. This is our production building. This is where we take all of the raw apples and either clean them to go into a bag for resale, or like we're doing here, we're cleaning these apples for apple cider. They're going down the production line where they get dumped in a tank of water. They go up the elevator and down a bunch of cleaning rollers where we're going to take them and grind them up, pulverize them into apple pumice, and squeeze it for an apple cider. We press apple cider every week and normally make batches of about 900 gallons of apple cider. So it's a lot of apples and a lot of apple cider that we make every week.
So what variety are these apples that we're seeing being cleaned right now, Darren?
So the cider apples normally are apples that aren't going to go into a bag or to a box for retail sale, whether they have russeting or they have a stem poke or something just isn't quite right with the apples. So these are Sweet Tango and Honeycrisp mix that are going into this batch of apple cider.
Okay, so it looks like they're moving along a conveyor belt. What does that do?
So the conveyor belt is our sorting tool. These apples aren't necessarily being sorted for weight or for size, but we use these when we determine which apples are going to go into a box or a bag for sale at either our apple orchard or at a retail store.
Excellent. Okay, so these were Honeycrisp and Sweet Tango, and these are going to the retail store. Do the brushes do anything special?
Yeah, the brushes are cleaning brushes. They basically all spin the same way. So as the apples come down the elevator, gravity feeds them onto the cleaning brushes. And as they come down, they basically kick the next layer of apples over so that they spend some time. Every apple gets brushed from 360 degrees.
Awesome. Okay, Justin is wondering, how many apples does it take to make apple cider? So maybe like a gallon, or however you sell your apple cider, how many apples does it take to create that?
So 1 bushel of apples, which is 40 pounds, makes 2.7 to 3 gallons of apple cider. So a pound of apples doesn't make a whole lot of apple cider. So 40 pounds of apples makes about 3 gallons of apple cider.
Okay, that sounds great. So let's move into this next room. Tell us what we're going to see here, Darren.
Sure. So we're loading apples into another cleaning station. The apples go through the brushes and get washed off and cleaned. From there, they go onto an elevator where they get lifted up into the pulverizer, which is a very loud machine. The pulverizer basically takes an apple and grinds it up instantly into just what we call a pulp. That pulp is then pumped into an area where we squeeze it as hard as we can and extract all of the juice. So here's the pulverizer and the apples, what they look like once they're pressed.
All right, so millions of little tiny pieces of apples. There's a question that a few students are curious about, Darren, the difference between apple juice and apple cider.
So apple juice is basically a cooked and a filtered apple cider. So
okay.
Apple cider is a raw product and apple juice is a manufactured product.
Got it. So they both probably go through this similar process at this point.
They will, yeah, they'll go through a similar process. So here they're going to pump the pumice onto onto one of our sacks. Those sacks have holes in it, and once they get pressed, all that apple cider comes out of these apples.
So here's a question, a numbers question for you, Darren. Marco is wondering how many apples are in 40 pounds. You mentioned a bushel is about 40 pounds. How many apples are in that bushel?
So depending on the size of the apple, I would say on average, there's 88 to 100 apples in a bushel. So if you look down, you can see all the cider dripping out of the bags already. So yeah, on average, I'd say there's 88 to 100 apples in a bushel. If you get a really big apple, there may be only 54 apples in a bushel, and really small apples, there may be 150 apples in a bushel.
Okay, awesome. So how many levels? It looks like we had, I don't know, was there 3 different levels of apples being pressed? How high does that get?
We'll put 5 or 6 press bags on here. Our press will go up to about 2,500 PSI. We want to make sure we don't put too many on there because we want to squeeze out all the juice that we can.
Awesome. That looks like a fantastic job to have. I bet it smells very good in there right now, like lots of apples.
It does smell very good, yes. Okay,
we have a few more questions. Addison is wondering, how many people visit your orchard each year?
So last year, I think we had about 16,000 purchases at our store. So it doesn't necessarily translate to the number of people that are coming to the orchard, but we had about 16,000 transactions at our store as far as people buying an item or two at the store.
Sure. Okay. So Mr. Olson's, Afton in Mr. Olson's class is curious if visitors, if you would come to the orchard, do you get to see the apple cider being pressed, or is that just a special treat for us?
Unfortunately, no. This is a food production facility, so we want to make sure we control who comes in, who comes out. Everybody that's in this building has to either wash their hands and wear gloves or wash their hands and wear some sort of covering on their hands. We don't let the general public come in here just because we want to keep this area of the orchard as clean and hygienic as possible. So every little piece of that process that you saw in there, this morning I gave that a bath in a bleach water solution of about 50 parts per million of bleach versus water. And we basically sanitized every inch of that room that was in there this morning. So we can't have a whole lot of people going in and out of there.
That makes sense. We don't want to get sick. We want everyone to be
right.
healthy.
Right.
Here's a question from Mahir. The student wants to know, how many different types of apples do you grow?
So we have 27 different varieties of apples we grow. A couple of the varieties, we just get a few apples. Like we've got one Prairie Spy tree left out in the apple orchard. So we only get, 2 or 3 bushels from that tree. We've got a few red Prairie Spies. We've got a few very old apples that we don't get a lot of apples off. But we got 27 different types of apples out there.
Awesome. Okay, here's a question from Tanner, and you may have mentioned this, but how many gallons of apple cider do you produce each year? And Tanner's in Miss Bree's class in Winona.
Oh, perfect. So we do about 900 gallons a week, and we do about 10 weeks of cider. So it's about 9,000 gallons of apple cider.
And how long does it take to make like a gallon of cider?
So we'll press all these apples today. We're going to press about 300 bushels of apples. Yeah, if we go back to our math, each bushel makes about 3 gallons. 300 bushels times 3 is about 900 gallons. That's our goal normally each week, is to get to 900 gallons of cider.
Awesome. Okay, we have about 7 minutes left, Darren, and I know you wanted to show us your retail store. So let's walk over there. And as we're walking, I have a few more questions. So Mrs. McNabb's class wants to know if you make any applesauce.
We do make applesauce. We don't sell any applesauce here ourselves. We have another producer that we buy their applesauce and resell it. But we have a whole bunch of people that love to make applesauce that come and buy our apples and make different sauces.
Awesome. Here's a question from Maverick. How long has your orchard been open?
So the orchard was started in 1986. So the original plantings were in 1986. The orchard as it stands now was really kind of developed in 1995. The building we were just in was built in 1995. The big cold room was built after that. And then our retail store was built in 2019.
Okay, well, let's check out that retail store. And another question as you're walking, Elizabeth wants to know the extra stuff that you don't use for the cider. What do you do with that?
The extra stuff that we don't use for cider, basically we have three uses. They either go into a bag or to a box and get sold at a retail store, or we sell them as a second grade, which goes down into our store, which is people can pick out and buy those apples for their home use. And third grade goes into the apple cider. Anything that doesn't go into that, we call it a cull apple, or we basically throw it away. We dump it out back and let it melt down into fertilizer for the trees in the future.
Excellent. So, sort of like compost.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's walk over to that retail store. And as we're walking, we might lose a little bit of connectivity. So we're going to show a little bit more of this video that's an overview of those beautiful rose gardens and just the orchard. So if anybody wants to visit, this is what you would see. That pond right there. I don't know if you guys heard, but Darren mentioned there's lots of koi fish, maybe even hundreds of them, which is really kind of cool. And then here we can see those rows and rows of the apple trees that grow all those delicious apples. So one shout out I want to give really quick to the teachers is that October is National Farm to School Month. So we're celebrating farmers like Darren who provide food that's used in your school meal program. So I know the Northfield schools, you guys use some of the apples that Darren grows on this orchard for your lunch and snacks. So if that's happening in your school, celebrate it. And tomorrow is the Great Apple Crunch, where classrooms across Minnesota are crunching into Minnesota grown apples at about noon. So I'll share a link in the chat if anyone's curious to know more about that. But Darren, let's go back. Tell us about this retail store that we're seeing.
Sure. Our retail store is the #1 outlet where we sell all of the apples we grow. Like these apples here, we got different sizes of bags. So this is a 3-pound bag of Honeycrisp apples. You know, I spoke before that we've got 7 or 8 acres of Honeycrisp apples. These are the #1 apples that people come here to buy by a large margin. So this is where we sell the apples. These are refrigerated coolers. We keep the apples nice and cool. If you guys buy apples at home, #1 thing when you get home, put them in the cooler. They like to be cool. If you have a vegetable drawer, that's even better. So we've got 3-pound apples, we got 5-pound apples, and we've got 11 different apples in the store right now that we're selling. So there's Honeycrisp, Sweet 16, Snow Sweet, Cortland, Regents, Haralson, Sweet Tangos. We've got a whole bunch of different types of apples that we sell here in our store.
Awesome. Here's a question from Ross. He's curious, what made you decide to start this business? Or was it a family business that you took over from a different relative?
It was a family business. So I originally started with an apple orchard over in Lake City. I worked there for several years. We've always kind of been an apple family. We've always liked apples. I've always been a farm kid. I grew up on a farm. I worked with Wells Fargo Bank for several years as an ag industry specialist doing farm loans, but I've always been interested in farming. So I basically got started, from a pretty young age. I bought this business 2 years ago from another family farm who started it in 1986. So I'm the second owner of this apple orchard here.
Awesome. So here's a question from Oscar and Anya in Mr. Olson's class. They're curious if you sell candy apples and caramel apples in this store.
We do sell caramel apples. We do not sell candied apples. Heating up apples and cooking apples, there's some potential for foodborne risks, but we do have caramel apples and they're sitting out here ready for purchase by anyone.
Yeah, they look amazing. And I know you've talked about the apple pies, but remind us, I think there's someone baking apple pies in the back. Tell us about how many apple pies you guys make and sell.
So yesterday and the day before, we made about 190 apples each day. Last year we made 3,800 apples, and I think we'll probably be closer to 4,500 or 5,000 apple pies this year.
Wow. So is it a secret recipe, or is it something that that has always been used there at Fireside Orchard?
No, it's not a secret recipe. Everything is just made by hand, which I'll be honest with you is probably the secret to making a really good apple pie. Is we just mix all the ingredients by hand and we bake them all by hand. We pay attention to the apple pie all the way through the process, and they seem to turn out really delicious that way.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a couple questions, Darren, about your family. Does your family live on the orchard land, and are other people besides yourself and your family involved in growing apples?
Our family doesn't live here on the orchard. It would be nice to live here on the orchard because there's a lot of hours that we put in throughout the season. We actually live between Rochester and Owatonna right now. My daughters, I have two daughters, Isabel and Evelyn. They do come and help us throughout the spring, and then my wife Tiffany helps us sell apples at the Minneapolis Farmers Market. So we're all involved as a family. Yeah.
Awesome. It's a family affair. Well, a
Yeah.
couple last questions. And I think, Darren, you said that Sweet Tango is your favorite apple variety. Do you have any other favorites or near the top of your list? People are curious.
Sure. Yeah, Sweet Tango is my favorite by far. I just love that apple. Honeycrisp is a really good apple. That's probably the most popular apple variety out there. There's quite a few good apples. We've got 27 different types, but there's a lot of good ones. The B51 apple is super sweet, super crunchy. That one's a favorite of mine. And I like some of the old school apples. Haralson are good. They're real nice and tangy, have a really nice white color to them. So yeah, I've got a lot of favorite apples, but I'll be honest with you, I eat so many apples right now. I'm eating, 10 to 20 apples a day, just trying out different apples to make sure that, they're ready and they're good to eat.
Oh, wow. 10 to 20 apples. That's a lot, Darren. I'm glad you like them. Okay.
I can't eat the whole apple. I take a couple bites of each.
Okay, awesome. This is the final question, which quite a few students have asked. What is your favorite part about being an apple grower?
My favorite part about being an apple grower really is being outside. I like the trees. I like to be outside. I like being a farmer. And the nice thing is with growing apples, that we're growing food for other people. So we get to see a lot of people. A lot of people come here. A lot of people seem to appreciate what we're doing. So that makes me feel good too.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Darren, thank you so much for showing us
Thank you.
all around your orchard. Jessica, you did some great camera work. We appreciate you getting close up on all of these things. And students and classrooms, thank you for all the fantastic questions. I know that I didn't get to ask all of them, but I hope most of them I was able to help you find out a little bit more about how Minnesota grows apples and how they're used in lots of different ways. So thanks for joining us this morning. Stay tuned. We're doing a virtual field trip to a turkey farm in November. So we hope you have a great rest of October, and we hope to see you back in November. Darren, thanks again for hosting us. Everybody have a